Hello friends, today I'm going to show you some kitchen decor DIYs that are absolutely gorgeous. Welcome to my crafting channel. I'm Alana from Upcycling NZ. Let's upcycle. For project number 1, I'm using these beer coasters. They're advertising coasters for a Speight's beer that we make here in New Zealand. It's very popular and we make great beer here. The colour, however, is very blokey, so I'm going to paint these and to make them fit better in with my home decor. So I'm taking a chalk paint in the colour Chocolate Truffle, and I'll be giving this an all over coat, getting in every little crevice and nook and cranny in these 5 pieces. Because the original colour is that dark navy blue, it's going to take a good 2.5 coats to cover all of that up. And when I say 2.5 coats, I mean I paint all over twice and then look for any areas where that blue's still showing through and just touch it up. Now that my paint's dried completely, I'm going to take the bottom of the box and I'm going to add some feet to it. So I have some little wooden beads and they are unpainted, and I'm going to add them to the 4 corners. I want to add some colour to my beads though, because they're a bit too white, so I'm taking some antiquing wax from Folk Art and I'm just going to add the wax to the beads, allow it to soak in a little bit and then buff it off. These little wooden beads are really soaking up that wax and showing all of the detail of the wood. I much prefer the colour that these beads are now, and it adds a nice bit of age and vintage look to my piece. I got these beads from the dollar store, but I also collect beads by buying old necklaces from thrift stores and pulling them apart. Now to attach these to the bottom, I'm using some epoxy glue, and I'll put a dab of glue on the bead and then push 2 beads together to transfer that glue so that I have 2 beads covered in the right area. This will provide a permanent hold once it sets up, but for a temporary hold I'm just going to put into the hole in each bead a little bit of hot glue just to hold it in place until it dries. This will protect the bottom of my piece from any damage from scratching on the surfaces that you put it on. Other things I've collected for feet on the bottom of my projects have been kids' wooden blocks, Jenga blocks, and I thrift those from charity stores. I also use these small plastic lids from containers from the recycling bin. So now that I'm waiting for the feet to dry, I'm going to take this little wreath stamp from one of my sets and place it on a backing sheet. And I'll be stamping that onto the face of each of my coasters. The ink that I'm putting on my stamp is not a permanent stays-on ink, but you'll see that it fits the purpose that I'm using it for. So I'll lay that down and just ensure that I press evenly across the surface and make contact with all areas from the stamp to my coaster. This one turned out really well, but they won't always come out 100%, and that's fine. We want a little bit of a distressed and handmade look about these. Next I'm taking some white interior-exterior house paint. I use this a lot in crafting because of its durability. Now just work my way around the wreath, filling in all of the berries around the stamp. Now you don't need to go out buying expensive paints to recreate this. You can use any paint you have in your stash as long as you finish with a nice sealed top coat at the end of your project. I get most of my paints from salvage yards and thrift stores, and I just follow the directions and use them in the appropriate way. So I'm repeating that process on both sides of my box and on the front of each of the coasters, and this is how they're looking so far. And now the next step in the process is I'm going to stamp over my stamp again, and I'm going to do that with a permanent black paint. And I apply this by spreading it out on a piece of glass and then picking up the paint with my stamp. And then I've just got to really carefully reposition that over top of the last place that I stamped. This is then going to redefine those berries on the surface and cover any inaccuracies when I was putting my white paint on. Now I thought that my stamp was fully symmetrical, but it turns out that it was not, so I had to spend a bit of time ensuring that I got the stamp in exactly the right angle. Once I got the stamp on, I realised that it looked just as good either way with the stamp on top or not. However, I still needed to do the stamp on top because remember I had not used permanent ink on my black underneath. I'm really loving how these are looking, and they really pop with that white in behind. And each of these coasters is just a little bit different. That's the real beauty of crafting, is creating one-of-a-kind pieces. Now please remember, if you're using paint on your stamps, remove it immediately afterwards so that it doesn't ruin your stamp. I'm going to have to use a sealer simply because I use chalk paint on my base coat, and this is a clear wax. This is by Feast & Watson, and it's a furniture wax. I found it a lot cheaper to buy than some of the hobby craft waxes on the market. Now I'm really pushing that wax into every single crevice on these coasters, making sure all of my chalk paint is covered. That way if your drink spills while you're using your coaster, you can wipe it up with a damp rag. Once I've applied the wax, I'm going to leave it for about 15 minutes before I buff it all off. But notice how much that colour changed and gave me that deeper, darker look, and I'm loving it. I'm also loving how the print on the front of the coaster sort of defines where your cup should be placed. Because these are elevated from your tabletop level, that will help you to make sure that you never spill your cup off the side of your coaster. So the next thing I'll do is take some antiquing wax on a sponge, and I'm just going to age around the edges of my 5 pieces. The clear wax helps me to control how much of that wax shows. I'll apply it by offloading most of the wax and then dabbing it around the corners and removing it if I've got too much built up. So meanwhile, I'm not far off reaching my next target as a YouTube creator. I promised that when I reached 100,000 views on my channel that I would do an in-person video. This is going to be one of my biggest fears to overcome. I just have never liked being the centre of attention. But I know that as a YouTube creator, if I want to grow my channel, I'm going to have to do it. So I've overcome my fear of doing audio on my videos, and my next challenge to grow as a person is to start to overcome my shyness of being on video in person. If you want, you can help by fast tracking me there. I'm about 8,500 views away from it, and if you like, share and subscribe, that will elevate my views to get me there. It's like my favourite saying, a comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. To finish project number 1, I'm just going to take a double length of twine. It's about 60 centimetres long, and I'm going to tie a bow around the edges and tuck that twine into those sides. And you can see the completed reveal at the end of the video. I think this would make a lovely gift for a friend, and I think with the neutral decor it will fit in with most people's colour schemes. Oh, and I forgot that I always burn off the extra fibres off my twine just to finish it off nicely. So now on to project number 2. We use a lot of these big tins at work and we recycle them, but I'm going to upcycle this one. I often use these in my crafting. They're great big tins and they have a beautiful gold lining on the inside. I'm taking some tin snips and I'm going to use that line down the side of the tin as a reference to guide me to keep my cuts straight. And it's always hard to just break through that lip at the top, so I use my wire cutters to help to create a groove, and that helps me to get the tin snips started. After that it's a little bit easier to get through the tin. Now I'm going to cut all the way down that side. And I found that it helped to turn it over and start to cut from the outside down. And I'll cut all the way to the end of the lip. So I got to this stage and I realised that I'd skipped a step. I'm going to mark less than halfway across the tin. I want a slightly more than halfway width across my tin when I'm finished. So I'm going to use the can opener and I'm going to cut all the way around the short side of that round. I've made sure that that very last turn reaches the cut that I've already made down the side of the tin. Then I'm going to mark another line down the side where the other end of that cut is, so that I can cut all the way down that side of the tin as well. I won't need this piece that I've cut out, and I'll save that for a future project. I have an idea or two for that. So this is what we're left with, and I'm very gently and carefully putting a bend in the base of that tin so that I can bend it up and it creates a pocket. Now I can lay it flat on the table, and I'm taking some white chalk paint and I'm going to do an undercoat in the white chalk because it takes very well to the tin. I'm using the chalk paint as an undercoat because I know that my top coat doesn't take very well to the tin, and the chalk will help it to do that. While I'm waiting for that paint to dry, I'm just going to take a backing board, and I've thrifted this breadboard. It's been well weathered and got some really deep cuts in it, and I'm going to use that for my backing board. So I'm going to take some 80 grit sandpaper. This is quite a heavy grit, and I'm going to give that a good sand on the best side of both sides of this board. Sanding this is starting to expose some of that wood underneath, and I'm really liking the look, so I'm going to leave it as it is. I was going to paint it, but I really like that weathered, worn down look with the scratches in it. I will paint the back though, just to hide all those scratches. So I'm just taking some chalk paint and I'm just going to give that one good coat on the back. Later on I went back and used some clear wax to seal that chalk paint so that it doesn't rub off on the wall when it's hanging. So what I really like are those old Campbell's soup tins, and I was never able to find one this size, but I did find a picture. So I'm going to attach that to the tin, and I'll create a background on the tin itself to tie into the picture on the front. So I've marked the centre line where the colour changes from red to white, and I'll paint the top half red to match the picture and the bottom half in white. And these are these water-based acrylic interior exterior house paints. I'm leaving some of that white chalk paint exposed so that the picture adheres really well to the tin. These paints have a semi-gloss finish. That's okay, I don't mind that on this project. Each of these colours is going to need 2 coats. And then I allowed the tin to dry completely, and I'm going to decoupage the picture onto the front of the tin with PVA wood glue. I'll spread that glue out nice and smoothly and evenly across the area where I want the picture to adhere to. And I'm going to use a scraping tool, a little plastic one, to help to get that picture into the grooves. This is from a high gloss magazine, so it's quite thick, that paper, and it can handle being treated like this. Once I've ensured that that picture has full contact to the tin, I'm going to wipe away any excess glue from around the picture. I think the old Campbell's food tins are very nostalgic, and you see them in a lot of antique stores these days. And now to protect that picture, I'm going to do another layer of PVA wood glue over the top, but I'm not going to get it onto the tin this time. I just want to seal the picture. I also want to age my tin up a bit, and I am not able to use antiquing wax or clear wax now because of that house paint that I've used, but I am going to use some black acrylic house paint, and I'm going to just apply that to random places around the edges. I'm just using a little fan brush for this, and I'm offloading a lot of the paint. You could also use a sponge. Then I'm going to take some cinnamon and I'm going to shake that onto the paint while it's still wet. And then when it dries, I can remove any excess, and it's going to look like wear and tear and a little bit of rust on the edges. This is just a really easy, cheap method, and you can create this look various different ways, but I found this one to be nice and quick and easy. Now that that's dry, I can attach it to my backing board. I'll use the bottom of the tin to mark how low on the board I want my tin, and also for the width of the top of my tin. Currently the top of the tin is splayed and out of shape, so this would be a more accurate measurement. I'm also marking where I want my blocks to sit, because I don't want them right up at the top of the tin. They're going to sit just below it. I'll use Jenga blocks as my mounts, and I'm marking 2 holes near the centre of the blocks for 2 screws so that they'll be nice and sturdy. I'll be nailing my tin on, so I want the nails to go either side of the screws so they don't hit them. I've selected a drill bit smaller than the width of the screws, and I'll drill down just so that the drill starts to eat into the backing board but no further. Because I don't want those screw heads to poke out of the Jenga blocks, I'm using a larger drill bit and I'm just making a little recess in both the blocks so that those screw heads will lie flush. I'll use the drill to put the screws in most of the way, and then I'll do the last bit by hand so that I don't over screw the screws. If I did, they'd fall out. And now I can finally mount my can to my backing board. I'll just mark the holes for where the nails are going to go. I'm using really small nails so that they don't come right through the Jenga block. And then I'm just punching holes where I need them to be with the nail first to make it easier to attach. It's a bit easier to do this on a workbench than the way that I'm trying to do it with the scrap wood underneath. I'm also going to punch a bigger hole in the round piece at the bottom of my tin. So I've just bent the rest back. I'll put a pilot hole in there and I'll attach a little tiny screw so that it doesn't come out the back of the backing board to hold that in. I'll also flatten the edge of that off with my hammer. Now I can fold that back and I can attach those little nails in the sides. I'll get my nails started first. I don't want to put too much pressure sideways on those Jenga blocks. I'll then put some scrap wood in between the Jenga blocks inside the tin to provide some support so that I can nail the rest of the way in. Now that I have that done, I'll take the centre blocks out and I'm going to just paint the nail heads to match the rest of the tin. This is now looking exactly the way that I imagined it, and I can think of heaps of uses for it in your kitchen. You can put utensils in here, you could put your tin foil and lunch wraps in it, you could put a plant or some florals, but this project's finished now. Project number 3 is a much easier one if you found that last project a bit complicated. I've got 2 rolling pins, one's a vintage one and the other one is a new one, so I want to make them look the same and I want to make them both look old. I'll give both of these a light sand, and I have to apologise because the next part I lost the footage for. I've taken some acrylic house paint and I've painted both of the handles in a combination of the red and the burgundy. I mixed the two to get 2 sort of vintage colour reds. Next I'm going through my stamp collection and I'm going to take various different elements from my florals and from my vintage stamps. Some of them are advertising stamps, and I'm going to apply them to the surface of the rolling pins simply by laying them flat on the table and rolling the pin across them. The only thing you really have to be concerned about is if it has writing or has a right way up, you have to ensure that they are going to end up the right way around each time you apply one. I just had to fix this little one. Also, when you're applying them, make sure that the space can take the stamp. You don't want them overlapping. So these rolling pins are now going to be decorative only, so they're not food safe. And I'm applying a little bit of writing stamp to fill in any voids in the area. I'm just using my stamp pad for this. I'm not too concerned about using paint for this one because I like that faded out look anyway. And I'll just repeat that process onto the second rolling pin. I really love how these are turning out. Let me know in the comments what you think of them. To add some age back to the handles, I'm going to take some rough grit sandpaper and I'm just going to distress that back to the wood in places. I'm going to remove any of the sanding dust with a wet wipe, and I know that that new rolling pin is not matching that old one very well yet, but you'll see how I'm going to fix that. I'll apply some clear wax to both of the rolling pins first. It's bringing that lovely colour back to the vintage rolling pin, and you'll see that the new rolling pin is really thirsty and really soaks up a lot of that wax. That's already added some colour to this rolling pin, but I'm also going to take some antiquing wax and I'm going to sponge that all over that wooden surface. That's brought those 2 colours of the wood closer together. I'm allowing that to dry for about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to buff off any excess, and I'm going to go back in again with the antiquing wax, and I'm going to sponge that around the wooden pieces at each end. So I think I've been able to make that new rolling pin look old. Let me know what you think in the comments. They're not exactly the same, but I still like that contrast between the two. I'll definitely be thrifting some more of these. I think I want to have a container full of them. Now on to the reveal. Well, that's it for this week's video. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for being you. Really appreciate it. I'll leave you with this little project that my daughter and her partner did on the weekend, where they turned an apple crate into 2 planters for their veggie garden. Here they are, all lined and finished, ready for painting or decorating, or just planting out in a rustic farmhouse style. Bye for now.